A glass of wine with dinner, a round of drinks with friends. Alcohol is so common, you'd be forgiven if you overlooked the billions of dollars in healthcare, law enforcement, and lost productivity that it costs us every year. That's to say nothing of the human toll. As Canada gets ready to make another popular drug legal, that's cannabis, is it time to rethink our relationship with booze? Joining us now to consider that, Anne Dowsett Johnston. She is the author of Drink, the Intimate Relationship Between Women and Alcohol. Christine Sismondo, author of America Walks Into a Bar, a spirited history of taverns and saloons, speakeasies, and grog shops. Stephen Beaumont, a beer and spirits writer and co-author of Best Beers, the indispensable guide to the world's beers. And Jen McNeely, founder and editor-in-chief of the women-focused website She Does the City. Good of all of you to join us here at TVO tonight for a very timely discussion. And let's start by just putting a few, Sheldon, shall we, introduce these facts to our discussion here. Canadians spent, can you get over this, north of $22 billion on alcohol last year alone. Canadians aged 15 and older drank 10 liters of pure alcohol per capita in 2016. That is 3.6 times higher than the global average. 77,000 people were hospitalized last year because of alcohol. That is 2,000 more than were hospitalized for heart attacks. Which raises, Anne, the question, do we drink too much in this country?
I'm no prohibitionist, but yes, we do. And 79% of Canadians 15 and over drink, and binge drinking rates have been going up. Dangerous alcohol dependence has been going up. And it's confounding that we aren't having a public conversation about this subject.
Well, we are right now. How would you define binge drinking?
Binge drinking for a woman is 4 or more on any one occasion, and for a man, 5 or more on any one occasion.
Four or five, are we talking hard drinks or beers or?
We're talking a drink, so no matter how you measure it, drink is a drink. And what's interesting is data that came out of the U.S., and there's a parallel, that came out of the U.S. just recently, said that alcohol dependence for women had gone up 85% since 2001. Something's happening, and we're really not focusing on it.
Jen, do we drink too much?
I think binge drinking is normalized in our society, so I think that there's not enough conversation and education, or even people aren't willing to admit the harms of drinking. So I do think that, in general, society is normalizing binge drinking. Normalizing
and drinking too much. Stephen, what's your view?
I have a bit of an issue with this definition of binge drinking that we have it. I agree fully that going out on a Friday night with the express purpose of getting loaded is a problem. And yes, that does happen. I live downtown Toronto. I see it happening all the time. But the idea that for a man, 5 drinks on one occasion, now that could stretch from cocktail hour till 2 in the morning. And if I have 5 drinks, I can emerge from that period completely sober.
Really?
So, 5 beers at 5% alcohol. 1 before dinner, 2 with dinner, 1 at 9 o'clock, 1 at midnight. My body processes 1 beer per hour, generally speaking. There is a cumulative effect, of course.
But it's not binge drinking if you do it once a month. It is if you do it every day.
The definition is that it's binge drinking every time that you do it.
Huh, okay. Christine, what's your view on this?
I mean, I come at it from a historical perspective. Yes, I think we drink a fair bit. Yes, I think we could have sort of more frank conversations about it. I think most of us go into drinking thinking that as long as it's not damaging our career or our family lives, we're fine, when the legal, or the medical recommendations for alcohol are far lower than most of us know. At the same time, though, we drink much less than we did, say, 150 years ago. And we're relatively on par with how much we've been drinking since about 1970. And I don't see rates going up substantially.
I mean, that's a fair point, isn't it? The stories about Johnny MacDonald showing up sloshed to Parliament, and along with everybody else, frankly, in the room, we're not there anymore, right?
Well, the thing that has people scratching their heads, epidemiologists scratching their heads, is that people are drinking more excessively and getting into trouble. Binge drinking has never been higher at university, and people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s are not slowing down. We have totally acculturized the notion that a glass of red wine is good for you and therefore 5 might be better for you. And we know a lot about trans fats and tanning beds, but we really don't know low-risk drinking guidelines in this country.
We had some millennials on this program not too long ago, and I did hear this notion of they start drinking before they go to the party in the evening because you actually have to sort of show up half in the tank already, and then you have more once you get to the party. I mean, there is something to this notion that we're all overindulging, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that pre-drinking is nothing new. It's something
Pre-drinking, that's what they call it.
it's something
That's
that's been going on a long time. I think a lot of people still, have they're not comfortable socializing without a little bit of a buzz. That said, I do think that sobriety as a lifestyle is becoming trendier. So I do think that while we, as a society, drinking heavily is still often the norm, especially if you go out to a bar or restaurant. Like if I go to a bar or restaurant, I'm often asked multiple times in the evening whether I'm going to have a drink, and that is more normal than saying, "Oh, and I'm just drinking water."
Asked by whom?
The servers or anybody there, the guests, people at the table, anybody really.
They're determined to put alcohol
Yeah.
in. Yeah, that seems to be the way.
However, I do think, when we're talking about millennials, I do think that not drinking, abstaining is becoming more socially acceptable.
This is an interesting point because I don't know the numbers for Canada because I haven't seen that data. But for the United States, they are showing that millennials are drinking less year to year. So there's actually a movement away from alcohol among the youngest generation with money.
That's what studies say?
Yes.
Because that sure doesn't fit with anecdotal evidence.
And certainly not with the deaths at campuses and what's going on. Actually, the higher your education level, the more likely you are to drink. Counterintuitive, but true. And the U.S. has always had lower drinking participation than us. We are really a lot higher than the U.S.
Do you know why?
Partly the religious right in the U.S. is broader and deeper, and that is said to contribute a lot. But no, the alarming drinking is on the rise, and it's worth a conversation.
I guess part of it is that they can't legally drink till 21. We can at 19 in this province.
That's right.
So that may account for some of it as well. Do you think of alcohol as food or drug?
I think of it as drug, but certainly that's a very new historical concept. If you look at how alcohol was viewed not very long ago, it certainly was considered food. It was a perfectly acceptable breakfast drink.
Breakfast?
Absolutely. Beer, stout for breakfast was...
It still is in some cultures.
That's right.
You go to Germany, you'll see people having a beer in the morning. It's not uncommon.
For you, is it a food or a drug?
I think spirits and beer and wine are two different animals. Spirits, yes, you're talking about the distillation of alcohol at a high concentration. Beer and wine both have nutritional components to them. So I think, yes, you can't discount the alcohol effect of beer and wine, but there is a nutritional aspect to that as well. They are foods as well as drugs.
For you, they were not.
No,
Right?
no, but I would argue that women, especially, and that's my specialty, see wine as a food group. That we really don't see it as a drug, and it's part of the problem. And I think that you've got a culture that is using alcohol to basically get by in a very stressful situation.
Jen, food or drug for you?
I think it depends on how you consume it. So I come from a household where my partner is deep into the food and wine industry, and he's actually a sommelier himself. So, he always talks about wine as food and is always talking about the terroir and the grapes and the varietals and the way he talks about wine is how it's paired with food and the taste of it and all those different things. And the way I used to consume wine was more like, how much can I drink until I don't think about anything? So I can appreciate that it's both. It just depends on whether you are, how you're consuming it, and if you're using it as a medication. So
We should clarify. You just said the way I used to consume it.
that's correct.
You want
Yeah.
to explain that?
Well, I've been sober for 7 years. I'm an alcoholic in recovery, and so my perspective is that I used to drink to numb. But if you're drinking because you are, I think people who are in the wine world, like my partner, it's about appreciating the textures, the tastes, the pairings, and certainly people can kind of bleed into both zones depending on how their intake is.
I will not be the first person to observe that this is the oddest couple I can imagine.
I know. Yeah.
He does wine for a living.
It's a bizarre
And
situation.
you have to
Yeah.
avoid it like the plague.
Yeah.
This works, eh?
It's working so far.
Okay. And when people drink, clearly, once upon a time, Jen was not drinking to enjoy the smell, the bountiful taste, all of that. As she says, she was drinking to get numb. But presumably there are people who drink because they like the taste of drink, not just to get numb. That fair to say?
Sure, we celebrate, relax, reward with alcohol, and we have surround sound messaging in our culture that is terrific. What we don't see is the runny mascara of the next morning and the hangover. And I think there are those who can and those who can't. And I think lowest drinking guidelines, 10 drinks a week for a woman and 15 for a man, are elements that we should be really aware of.
Why should it not be equal?
Because democratically we're equal, metabolically and hormonally we're not. Telescoping is real. Women become addicted to alcohol much faster than men, and it's not just body size.
That's an empirically provable fact.
Absolutely, and it's really fascinating.
Do you, Christine, in your judgment, think that people, when they take that drink, understand the risks associated with that beverage?
Well, I think if you're taking one drink, then the risks are probably relatively low, is from my perspective. I think that most people don't realize that 2 glasses of wine every day puts you over the limit. I think that is a surprising fact to most people who drink wine on a regular basis. I also think that if you completely remove the alcohol, if you had some magic pill that could remove the alcohol from wine completely but leave the taste 100% intact, that people would not drink it. I think that
because they want the buzz.
Well, I think to say it's only about the taste and the food dismisses something that's an important part of it, and for better or for worse. I think
Lubrication.
Lubrication,
Yeah.
that's a word, yes. The calming influence of a drink at the end of a rough day at the office.
Decompression.
Absolutely.
and also what you were calling it, the lubrication, the social lubrication, right? There's a reason that we've had this drug in our civilization for so long. It's because people like the way it sometimes can bring people together.
Do you think people understand the risks associated when they go out for drinks?
My back goes up a bit when you're talking about the risk associated with going out for drinks. Alcohol is probably, I'd say almost certainly, the most scientifically studied food or beverage in the world. And yet there is no consensus globally on the number of drinks per week for a man or for a woman. Guidelines vary dramatically from nation to nation.
Anne just said there was.
Only in Canada. That's recommended for Canada. There is no consensus around the world from nation to nation as to what is the safe amount. I think that when we look at health considerations, we often overlook that de-stressing aspect of the drink at the end of the day. I mean, stress is acknowledged by medical science as an enormous contributor to a number of diseases. So when we're talking about alcohol, we don't need to talk about alcohol in general. We should talk about alcohol as it is approached.
Well, let me follow up on that. If alcohol can take the edge off a rough day at the office and you don't drink to excess and you reduce your stress, which as Stephen points out, reduces the potential of a lot of diseases,
Right.
that's good, isn't it?
Well, I don't think we're having a discussion about the fact that there's a huge oncology report that came out in November looking at the fact that 5+ % of cancers are caused by alcohol, 15% of Breast cancer cases are attributable to alcohol. We don't like this conversation, and we don't have it. If you can decompress with 1 glass of wine and keep it at 1 glass of wine per day, that's a very uncommon pattern, but if you can, more power to you. But those who get into trouble with alcohol tend to find it's progressive, and denial is a big part of it. So if you can stick to one, go for it.
That's the way to go. We all know Andre Picard around this table here, the very fine health writer for the Globe and Mail. Sheldon, would you bring this graphic up, please? Because here's what he writes about this. Of course, you will have read that drinking is good for your health. While moderate drinking is associated with better health, moderate drinkers tend to have healthier lifestyles overall, so it's difficult to tease out the role of that daily glass of wine. Also, if one thing is clear in the research, it is that there is no benefit in non-drinkers starting to drink. Is that true, Jen, in your view?
No benefit in non-drinkers starting to drink. Yeah, I would say that's true. I mean, I know that ever since I stopped drinking,
You're healthier.
yes, I'm healthier. And while it took a couple years to feel confident in social settings again and to kind of relearn socialization, even for the first 6 months, I didn't know what to do with my hands. You know, I was so accustomed to using them as part of interaction. However, sobriety is fun. It is fun, and I always try to tell that to people who are, you know, who are running into problems with alcohol and want to stop but feel like they're giving up so much. You can still enjoy life without alcohol.
Good not to wake up the next day in the gutter, right?
Yeah.
That is a good thing. Christine, how about you? That I don't know how many times we've heard it. 1 glass of wine every night with dinner has medicinal purposes and it can actually make you healthier. Is that true?
You know, the studies change frequently about these, you know, 1 glass of wine, the resveratrol, all the different things. I don't really pay a lot of attention to them, to be honest with you, because I feel that the biggest risk factors with any kind of drug addiction have to do with larger societal issues, typically, that they tend to do with an inability, with systemic barriers to advancement, with poverty. And I think those things are impossible to separate out from the equation as well. So when we say that a moderate drinker also has a moderate, healthy lifestyle, it's also, there are things that we can't figure out exactly that are going on with heavy drinkers as well.
Gotcha.
I mean, I don't think that it can possibly be healthy to drink 70 drinks a week the way that people drank in 1830 or 1840. I think that's quite clear. But I don't want to attribute any health benefits to alcohol necessarily.
I wonder if Stephen does. 1 drink with dinner, has that got some medicinal qualities?
I've seen studies after studies, and like Christine, as a professional writing about alcohol, you tend to glaze over after a while, and you just stop looking at them so much. But I did see an article from the UK just the other day, which was brought to my attention on the J-curve of health. And the J-curve of health is a accumulation of studies that show that non-drinkers start at a certain level of longevity for lifespan and disease and all this kind of stuff. And then as you add in drinks, that health actually improves. And then as you continue to add in drinks, of course, it starts to decline again. So, I mean, this is an accumulation of studies. And that suggests to me that modern consumption of alcohol can be beneficial. As Picard points out, maybe moderate drinkers do tend to have healthier lifestyles. That is arguable. But certainly there are scientific indications that moderate consumption of alcohol can be beneficial for more than just the resveratrol in wine, but for that de-stressing aspect, for the socialization. We don't interact with each other anymore. You know, more and more of our time is in front of a screen. So what's wrong with going to a bar and actually having a drink or two and talking to people? That's an important part of human life.
I hear you, but I presume there's a happy medium somewhere between all of us alone at home on our computers talking to each other on Facebook and having no human interaction, and going to a bar on a Friday night and getting sloshed because we love each other's company so much. Right?
I wouldn't recommend anybody go to a bar on a Friday night and get sloshed.
Okay.
I think it's a social beverage.
Where are you on this issue of whether or not 1 drink has medicinal qualities, and if you don't drink, don't start?
If you don't drink, don't start came out of the oncology report. I think if you can manage your alcohol and it's part of your socialization, fine. I really do. But I really, really believe you know how to count your calories, you know how to do your downward dog. Do count your drinks. And we don't live in a culture that measures alcohol unless you're a beer drinker. You're not actually aware how often that server is coming up and refilling your glass. So do you really know how much you're drinking, I think is the question. And you need to.
Can I get a better understanding? We already know, Jen, you don't touch alcohol at all anymore. How about Christine? Do you drink?
I do.
How much?
I probably drink a couple of glasses of wine every day.
Every day?
Yeah.
Red or white? Doesn't matter?
Actually, I drink sherry, which is,
Really?
a really low alcohol.
Okay.
Because I tend to like really low alcohol drinks because I can't handle strong ones anymore.
And is it over like 2 drinks over dinner, that type of thing?
Yeah.
And as far as you can tell, your body's okay with that and you're fine with that?
Sure.
Okay. Stephen, how about you?
I drink more or less every day. I take regular days off of drinking, but I have 2 different types of drinking. Because I'm a professional critic, I drink to do tasting notes. And for beer especially, you cannot spit. You can't do a proper beer tasting note by spitting, so I have to swallow that.
It's got to go down the hatch.
A lot of beer goes down my kitchen sink. A lot of very good beer goes down my kitchen sink,
Why is that?
unfortunately, because I can't finish every bottle.
Oh, okay.
But yes, I enjoy drinking. I do take regular days off drinking, and every once in a while I get a little too enthusiastic, I will admit. I also exercise 5-6 days a week and watch what I eat and keep myself active.
There is such a thing, I gather, as dry January. On the assumption that you've overindulged during the Christmas break, you need January just to sort of dry out and not touch alcohol at all. You into that?
I'm not into that. Professionally, that would be suicide.
How about recommending for those who don't write about alcohol?
I think for people who want to do it, there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's a fine idea. But as I pointed out in a post the other day, if you take 2 days off drinking per week, and yet you normally drink daily on a daily basis, you get a lot more time off drinking by doing the 2 days per week than you do by doing January.
And what's your relationship with alcohol now?
I don't drink anymore. I had a very pleasant and then enthusiastic relationship with alcohol. And I'm in my 10th year of not drinking. And as with Jen, I have been able to have and do have a wonderful social life.
You have not had a single drink of alcohol in 10 years.
No,
And you prefer life that way.
I do.
Because what was it like when you were imbibing?
I have had 2 alcoholic parents. And in the year and a half where I was at a very big job, VP of McGill University, and found myself drinking to cope with stress, scared the living daylights out of myself.
Are you an alcoholic?
Oh, I think so.
Which you inherited presumably from your parents.
I think so. My odds with 2 parents went up 65%. And so I was fine in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, and I wasn't fine in my 50s. And I just took a sledgehammer to it.
Let's do another excerpt here. This is from Harold R. Johnson, who wrote a book called Firewater about Indigenous relationships with alcohol. And he said this about how the rest of the population views alcohol. In their story, if a person does not drink, it is automatically assumed they do not drink because they have a religious reason, or more often, it is assumed it's because they can't handle it. Only alcoholics in their story do not drink. Healthy, normal people in that story often consume alcohol daily. Every significant event is marked by alcohol. Birthdays, marriages, graduations, a sports team winning or losing, and even death is saluted with a drink, a toast. To not drink is to cut oneself off from important parts of the story. Christine, you're our historian here. How did alcohol become so integral to basically every ritual we have in society?
See, one of the things that I worry about with having this conversation is making it sound like it's a new thing. Alcohol's always been integral to every part of our society. It's been, not in every culture exactly, but in our culture, in Western civilization, it's certainly been a massive part of all celebrations and all bonding. Beer grew up with agriculture, grew up with civilization. And some people even theorize that it played a role in people being able to have social bonding. So it's not new. If anything, we drink less now than we have in the past. When we didn't trust the water, we drank that instead. We drank beer instead of water. And so I think that sort of to make it a modern problem is ahistorical. We did have prohibition, of course, which took it away for a while,
Well, sort of.
and then brought it back.
Right.
So,
Jen, let me ask you, in terms of the point that Harold is making here, that not to indulge in alcohol at all of these different rituals, in some respects, cuts us off from all of these important parts of our quote-unquote story. How long did it take for you not to feel cut off from all of this because you stopped drinking?
You know what? It took about a year and a half. And when I started to share openly and honestly about the fact that I couldn't drink anymore, then I felt much more at ease in social situations. And I think that the narrative is changing. I do think that while there might be stats that show that binge drinking is on the rise, I think that there's a counter social movement to celebrate healthy lifestyles. And I think that there is definitely a strong cohort of younger people who, just like juicing and all the different sort of mindfulness and yoga, those are all things that are equally as celebrated and routine. And I think that the feelings of being alienated in social situations because you're not drinking, there's a shift going on. And I think that because people are sharing their stories more openly about addiction or even just about how alcohol wasn't working for them, whatever that means, there is more of a social acceptance to not drink.
I want to ask Anne about that. When you go out, for a Friday night dinner or whatever,
Right.
and everybody, they take the drink order, of course, before they
Right.
take anything else, and you are not ordering alcohol.
Right.
Are there people around that table who may not know of your past with alcohol and saying, "Come on, Anne, one drink, what the hell?"
Absolutely, and that doesn't go away. But I would really agree with Jen that the recovery movement is alive and well, and it's it's like a revolution. There's an interesting cohort of certainly North Americans, but it goes much broader. Amazing thing in Australia called Hello Sunday Morning, which is try not drinking for a month and see the way your life may change. And there is a real rumbling happening about what life is like without alcohol.
Could it be, though, that it's everywhere, right? Our cultural and personal interconnection with booze is so long-standing, we may actually be afraid to find out how much better life could be without it, right? We're so dependent on it now.
I remember saying, what will happen if I don't have champagne at my wedding? And somebody said, are you getting married? And I said, no. And I think that sort of says it in our culture. We think that everything should be celebrated, as Harold said. And that, by the way, is a terrific book.
It is a great book, yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Stephen, let me try this with you. Talk about cultural interconnectedness. Nobody goes to a dinner party without bringing a bottle of wine, right? I mean, that is just the thing you do.
That's typical, yeah.
Are we suggesting that we shouldn't do that anymore, or we should be bringing something else?
I don't think so. I mean, wine, or I like to push for quality beer at the same time.
Okay.
I think that those are the default beverages for mealtime service. That does not mean that everyone should be forced to have one. If I knew I was going to dinner at a non-drinker's house, I would bring flowers. I would not bring a bottle of wine. I think that would be very self-serving to do so. I also think it's a very immature attitude to criticize somebody for not drinking. I mean, that's the type of thing you do when you're still an underage kid and you're like, hey, come on, have a drink, Joe, have a drink. If someone chooses not to drink, that's a laudable choice. If I choose to drink, I think that's also a laudable choice. I don't think we should be judging people on whether or not they have a glass of wine or not.
We shouldn't be, but we do. And I guess let me follow up with you. If you find yourself in a social setting and you're the only person at that table not ordering alcohol, and somebody says, oh, come on, Jen, one drink's not going to kill you, do you come back with the hammer and say, well, actually, I'm an alcoholic and I cannot drink?
I do.
You do say that.
Yes.
That puts them in their place, doesn't it?
It does, and it catches people off guard. And I often find that the people who are the most insistent that you have a drink are likely ones who are struggling with their own issues with drinking. if they're that concerned that you don't have a drink in your hand, there's probably something else going on.
Do you, when you go to friends' house for dinner, is it always bringing a bottle of wine?
Sure, absolutely.
You do?
But like Stephen said, I would bring flowers if I was going to somebody's house who didn't want to have alcohol. Yeah.
In our remaining few minutes here, let's put one last issue on the table. You know that next July, the plan is to have cannabis legal across the country. The LCBO is going to run it here in the province of Ontario. I wonder if there are any lessons that we have learned in how we treat alcohol that might mitigate and or minimize the risks that could be involved as marijuana becomes legal. Anne, any thoughts on that?
We know that marketing, accessibility, and pricing really affects how we drink, and we should be looking at those issues. I think the biggest issue is drugging and driving, and it's the one that everyone's talking about and thinking about.
Stephen?
I'm going to be very interested to see how advertising is controlled when cannabis becomes legalized, because I think that's going to have a major impact on how it is consumed by people. My greatest concern about the introduction of cannabis into Canadian society is the combination of marijuana and alcohol. So we have devices to measure alcohol consumption in bloodstream. We have devices to measure cannabis consumption in bloodstream. What about the person who says, oh, I'm only going to have 2 beers, but they don't have a joint? And that is I think, a major concern.
Christine?
I think the LCBO rolled out in 1927, and I think that it made a lot of errors when it legalized alcohol at that point. And I hope that Ontario can learn from some of those lessons, because I think that I'm not necessarily a critic of the LCBO. I think they do some things really well, but they didn't at first. And I think it's going to be crucial to do this properly, or else it will all be done through, essentially the equivalent of bootleggers.
Gotcha. That's our time, friends. Can we confirm for our viewers? It's just water here today. It's just water. Thanks all of you for coming into our program tonight. Appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Cheers.
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 The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.